Hi dear story manifestors, I am so glad you're here. On this channel we give you writing pep talks, writer's mindset advice and storytelling. I am Leah Falls, writer, actor and mindset coach, and today's topic is an exciting one. Is celebrating failure a good thing? When is it a great thing? When is it not that good of a thing? And what's failure anyway, especially in a writing context? How do we define it? Stay tuned. So when we want to figure out if celebrating failure is a good thing or a bad thing, the first thing we have to figure out is what is failure anyway? And that leads us to expectations. Now, expectations is a very loaded word. Like, there's so much very contradicting advice about expectations. Should we expect the best? Should we prepare for the worst? Is expectation the root of all suffering? Well, I'm not saying I'm here to enlighten you completely, but here's my take on it. When we expect something very specific and are completely inflexible, then it leads to pain. The key is to expect a certain thing or something better, because then it becomes the basis of our vision. To really pursue a vision and to become a visionary artist and to, finish a book, you need to actually expect that you can finish it. You need to see that you finished it. You need to see that it's published, because otherwise you're setting yourself up to failure, because you're sitting down and you don't know why you're doing this. So expect the success, expect the good outcome, but leave room for something better, because then it becomes a vision. Now, expectation in relation to failure. If we expect something specific and that doesn't happen, that's a failure. That could be defined as a failure. But failure isn't necessarily a bad thing in that regard, because when we expect something specific or something better, that failure becomes an opportunity. It becomes an opportunity to reframe. It becomes an opportunity for something better to come into our life. It makes room for something that falls away that we thought would be really beneficial, but actually would lead us not quite to what we really want. So failure in that regard is an opportunity to foster trust in something better, to expect better, to always expect something that you can't quite picture yet because it's just too nice. And that's personally something I really prescribe to, because yes, there's this whole idea of expectations sets you up for disappointment, but that's very close to the whole idea of staying realistic. And those beliefs aren't necessarily empowering beliefs. It gives you the short-term reassurance of knowing you're prepared for the worst, but it doesn't actually motivate you. So instead, if we open up our expectations to say every failure just means we're a little closer to something better, then failure becomes something to celebrate, because it's an opportunity to trust. It's an opportunity to trust in a better future, and it's an opportunity to learn how to trust in that more. And trust me, that takes time. That's a process. That's not something that just happens overnight. So that's why failure can be a really great thing in that regard, because it gives you the opportunity to foster it. A moment where I really learned that was last year, when I became very focused on a specific expectation and a specific outcome, and didn't really leave the room for the magic and didn't really leave the room for failure to be a good thing. I had a meeting with an agent at a workshop last year, and it looked good that he was going to sign me, and I was really excited, and I was focusing on just that. And I had kind of tunnel vision. And that tunnel vision cuts out a lot of other opportunities, and opportunities I'm now living and realizing. He didn't end up signing me. My genre didn't actually fit his catalog, so it was just a mismatch. But I was quite defeated, because I had just focused on this one thing, and I allowed failure to just be a failure, not an opportunity, not a reassurance that something better is coming to me. And it took me a few weeks, and I'm really happy now that he didn't sign me, because it actually didn't quite make sense in that regard, and it wouldn't have worked out for my best benefit and for his either. So that's one of the lessons that I learned from that encounter. The other way to look at failure is as a lesson. So let's say something doesn't go as planned, and it can be really small too. You oversleep for 5 minutes, or you wanted to write 1,000 words and then you got 500 words out. oh no, you made productive progress. Shame on you. No, please celebrate every single word you get because it's progress. It's amazing. Side note, but in each of those little failures is a lesson. So you only got 500 words instead of 1,000 words. Okay, I really shouldn't have picked this example because it's, it's still great, but you're disappointed by how much you got done that day. Well, let's look at it. What wasn't ideal about the circumstances you put yourself in? Were there distractions? Did you put too much pressure on yourself? Did you not celebrate the little steps in between to getting to those words enough? Because that's really important. You can't skip that. Otherwise, you're just putting that big goal on you, and if you don't reach it, you're already a failure. So you're pre-assigning that to yourself. That's not good. So what's the lesson you can find in that? What's the lesson? Every time that something doesn't go as you planned it to go, there's a lesson in it. And that's something to celebrate. Now, for me, to go back to the whole agent thing, I really learned a lot about the differences between traditional and self-publishing and indie publishing in my whole excursion into querying, because I had done some research and everything, but some stuff takes just realization and living through it and just evolving through it yourself. And I learned, for example, I wrote an epic fantasy book, which will be published next summer, and I learned that epic fantasy isn't exactly the best genre to start in a traditional market with, because you kind of need a proven success record to really be able to market them in the traditional way. So now I'm working on a contemporary book, which will be much better for the traditional market, while also taking my book baby that I absolutely love and going the indie route with it. And that actually is going to give me so much more experience and fits much more with my lifestyle. And that's a lesson I allowed myself to learn from the failure of traditionally publishing. So when we're encountered with a failure like that, when we're encountered with something that didn't go as planned, it has opportunities in them, it has new trust for us in them, it has lessons in them, and it is something to celebrate. We learned, we made that mistake, we don't have to make it again. It's a great thing. How can we honor that concept specifically in writing? Now, something I do, I was talking a little bit about goal setting already. Something I do before each writing session is I set goals. That's really important. Small, achievable goals, so that you actually get the dopamine rush and that you actually succeed at writing every time you sit down, because you need to. Otherwise, you're telling yourself that you're not enough of a writer, and we never want to tell ourselves that. Every time you sit down and write something, you are enough of a writer. So set yourself those goals, mark them off, give yourself that dopamine rush. And one of the goals I set myself in relation to failure is to say, make room for imperfection. And I kind of vary that one with write a shitty sentence. So depending on my mood, sometimes I say make room for imperfections, and sometimes I say write a shitty sentence, not sandwich. I mean, like, depends on the scene. No. And the reason why I do that is because it really allows me to fail in writing. It really allows me to write something bad and still succeed. It immediately reframes any kind of failure. It immediately gives it to me as an opportunity for something better to come out later. And that's another way to think of it in terms of writing. Your first draft is the embodiment of expect this or something better. You go in with an idea, you expect to write that idea, but almost always something better comes out. Yes, the first draft is imperfect. The first draft could be considered a complete failure in itself. But then when you revise it and the draft just evolves, it turns into so much more than it initially was. It turns into so much more than your initial idea was. And that is where the beauty and magic of writing comes in. And that's where the beauty of magic of life comes in too. You just cannot expect the whole beautiful picture to come to you immediately. And therefore, every failure is kind of more of a step towards the direction of something better. And every shitty sentence you write, every shitty sentence you write is another step towards that path of something better. That's all fine and good, but how do we actually celebrate it? Let's say something, oh gosh, okay. Let's say 1,000 words, those 1,000 words that you wrote now just got deleted. That really sucks, right? That's kind of a failure in multiple multiple ways. It's a failure of your computer, it's a failure of you not backing it off, it's horrible. So what do? We don't want to immediately force ourselves to feel differently. We want to let out that frustration. Let it out, feel it. Okay, what's the worst thing that comes from it? Where do we go from here? Allow yourself to just feel the frustration for half an hour until those questions actually come back to you and until you can start answering them. And then let's reframe it. All right, those 1,000 words. Were they first draft? They were probably an early draft because, I mean, if it's like a last draft, you probably have them backed up a little bit already. So if it's more of a first draft, you're gonna rewrite a bunch of it anyway. So you got the essence of that scene, right? Now you can go back to it as a better writer already because every time you write, you're a better writer than the last time you wrote. That's just, even if you wrote something amazing that last time, your craft gets owned every time. So now you can sit back, go back to the scene, and write it as a better writer. You know the essence, you know what happened, and you can already shape it into something beautiful without the attachment of trying to keep everything. So that would be an opportunity. That would be a lesson. Wait, that would be the opportunity. The lesson would be, okay, I need to back shit up. I can't have that happen again. So you learn something and you have an opportunity for something new. And the way I really learned that was in improv theater. For a lot of the warm-up games, there's a lot of very quick reaction warm-up games, and there's often like a ball being thrown, and you just make a specific sound, and every time we messed up, every time someone messed it up, we would all go, yay, because failure. So after you let out those emotions, after you figured out how to reframe it and to see what the opportunity of the lesson is, just go, yay! I fucked up! I did it! It's amazing! I don't have to do it again. I learned from it, did something good in it, yay! So the reaction of, yay, I failed, is also something that you really need to practice, but it's worth it. It absolutely is worth it. And that's how we celebrate failure. And in those regards, celebrating failure is a really good thing. When is it not? So we just talked about all the benefits, but when is celebrating failure actually a bad thing? It's a bad thing when we become really comfortable with the idea of just being bad at something. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be comfortable at the beginning to start something and suck at it. Please, we all make mistakes. My very, very, very first draft was full of Hamilton song quotes because I thought that's how you write. Turns out it's not. And that's all fine, but don't stay in the zone where you're just comfortable with being bad at something. And I learned that in another acting class, also involving a ball. The best lessons in life come from, no. We were also throwing a ball in a circle and we were counting, and it was a very quick, like, you weren't allowed to drop it, and we were counting up and seeing how often we can in a circle very quickly throw it without breaking the numbers, like with going further up. And at the beginning there was a lot of like, I dropped it, and everyone laughed. It was fun, and the teacher was like watching, and after a few rounds he was like, you're realizing that you're just celebrating not being good at it instead of trying to get better. And it's very comfortable to just resign to the idea that you suck at something and not hold yourself to a higher standard, because holding ourselves to a higher standard is always difficult. It's always the more uncomfortable thing. It's outside of our comfort zone, but it's also where all our dreams and visions are. So we started being like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe we should, try to actually reach the goal and try to make a high score and stuff and work together on this, instead of just being like, oh, well, we're all clumsy. That's the whole thing. It's this whole idea of telling yourself, oh, I'm just clumsy, I'm just bad at this, I just suck at blah blah blah. That's a story you're telling yourself, and it's okay if it temporarily soothes you and gives you some relief in a certain way, and it is reassuring, but that shouldn't be the story you tell yourself on long term, because it's not an empowering story. We need to be careful about getting stuck in celebrating failure to avoid shame. Because First of all, avoiding any emotion is a really bad idea, because then we're just focusing on it and we're repressing it, and we're, it's like avoiding nerves. It's just like, I'm not nervous, I'm not nervous, I'm not nervous, instead of allowing ourselves to feel it, move through it, and figure out some strategies to deal with it. So when we really try to go for something, it's very vulnerable, it's very scary, and because of what we in society have built around the idea of failure, and built around the idea that failure even exists, because as we looked at the positive ways, failure is always a step. It's not the end result. There's not actually permanent failure, but we kind of believe there is, and there's a lot of shame around it. Like, if you try to throw the ball and you fail, you kind of feel ashamed for it. Well, you don't have to, but it might come up. And it's so much easier to just say, well, I'm bad at it, so I don't have to feel ashamed, instead of being like, I tried, I really did, and I'm improving, but there's still opportunities and lessons on the way, and I'm okay with that. And that takes bravery, but I think it's the better option. Celebrating failure becomes a bad thing when we make failure our default mode, instead of seeing it as a stepping stone to success, as a stepping stone on our journey. So let's not live in it. Let's not celebrate it so much to get commiseration, to get reassurance. We don't need that. We can go into the vulnerable, scary parts of ourselves. We can go onto the vulnerable, scary path of actually trying to succeed, because we can. And that's where, you'll feel some icky feelings, and in the writing journey, there's going to be a lot of icky feelings, but icky feelings are temporary, and living in failure isn't. So that's my 2 cents on celebrating failure, when we should, when we shouldn't, and when it's, well, actually should and shouldn't are a bad concept here, but when it benefits us and when it doesn't. I hope that helped. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. But before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. What's a failure that you're currently struggling with? What's something that you've overcome that you would like to share? Let's continue the conversation. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe, and send it to someone who you know would benefit from it as well, because we want to spread the love. For more inspiration, follow us on Instagram at storymanifestors.com. No, at Story Manifestors, and subscribe to our newsletter at storymanifestors.com. On our website, we also offer a free artistic mindset meditation, and we have writing services like Story Fix to unstuck yourself, character interviews, manuscript critiques, sensitivity reads, and much more. Just go check it out. Have an amazing day, and remember, you got this. We believe in you.